Sagittarius, a tall man is coming to your home. What happens next will shock you. Dear Sagittarius, what if I told you someone is coming? Not through the door of your home, but through the threshold of your soul? A tall man, not of flesh and bone, but made of memory, of meaning, of something you thought you'd buried long ago. He isn't a stranger. He isn't here to take. He arrives as a mirror, as a messenger, as a symbol of a promise your soul once made to itself and then quietly forgot. You see, Sagittarius, you don't carry pain the way others do. You laugh through it. You travel away from it. You fill your days with movement, with plans, with vision. But there is a place within you, silent, sacred, that still remembers. And when something or someone appears out of nowhere, touching that inner flame, it's not coincidence. It's destiny whispering, "You're ready now." This isn't a story about fear. It's a story about awakening, about returning to the version of you that never needed permission to feel deeply, to seek meaning, to face the past not with regret, but with reverence. So take a breath. Not the kind that keeps you moving, but the kind that slows you down enough to truly listen. If something stirs in you as we walk through this message, honor it. Share it if it speaks your truth. Subscribe only if your soul feels at home here. Because what comes next isn't just a twist in the story. It's a doorway into a part of yourself that has waited quietly for far too long. Gate 1. Someone is calling your name in the dream you tried to forget. Sagittarius, how long has it been since you truly stopped to listen? Not just to the noise around you, but to the whisper inside you that never left? You may have believed that you've outgrown the past, outrun the ache, distanced yourself enough from the name you don't speak out loud anymore. Life for you has been full of forward motion, of seeking, of becoming. But there are moments, quiet and sudden, when something returns, not to haunt but to invite, not to confuse but to remind. There is a dream, perhaps recurring, perhaps fleeting. A tall figure appears, not threatening, not speaking, just standing. And though they say nothing, something inside you shifts, as if you know them. Not from this life, maybe not even from any known moment, but from something older, deeper. The soul doesn't forget what the mind tries to tuck away. And Sagittarius, for all your fire and independence, there is still a room in your heart where a forgotten echo lives. You might not remember their face anymore, but you remember how it felt when they turned away. You remember the moment you stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped holding on to that unfinished conversation. You buried it beneath words like, "It's in the past, I've moved on. It's nothing." But it was something. And that something is now standing at the doorway, not of your house, but of your soul. I once worked with a Sagittarius man named Luca. Bright, free-spirited, never stayed in one place too long. But one night, after a dream that left him shaken, he came to me and said, "I don't know why, but I saw my father again. He passed 10 years ago. We never made peace. And in my dream he didn't speak. But I woke up sobbing, like something in me finally broke open." He hadn't thought of that day in years. The argument they never resolved, the letter he never sent. But that dream, it wasn't just a dream. It was the soul's invitation to return, not to the pain, but to the truth beneath it. Sagittarius, you have always traveled far. Not just across places, but through ideas, beliefs, identities. You've reinvented yourself 1,000 times. But no matter how far you go, there is a part of you that never stopped waiting for closure. Not necessarily with a person, but with a part of yourself you had to leave behind to keep going. That tall figure you see, whether in dream or memory or sudden knowing, is not a ghost. It is a symbol, a message, a spiritual presence sent not to scare you, but to awaken what was left behind. In Buddhist teachings, we learn that what is unhealed will continue to return, not as punishment, but as invitation. And in your case, dear Sagittarius, it returns when your soul is finally strong enough to face it, not with fire, but with tenderness. You don't need to revisit every wound. You don't need to understand everything. You only need to ask, who have I not forgiven? Not out of anger, but out of grief? Who do I still meet in my sleep? Not because they didn't love me, but because something between us was never truly laid to rest. Perhaps it's not even about a person. Perhaps it's a dream, a desire, a version of you that you left behind because life asked too much of you. A musician who stopped playing. A writer who stopped writing. A child who was once brave, then told they were too much. A young soul who believed deeply in love, until love taught them to run. Sagittarius, you are a sign of vision, of purpose, of sacred fire. But you are also a sign that carries deep spiritual grief, the kind that comes not from what was done to you, but from what you had to abandon in order to survive. And now that grief knocks, not to overwhelm you but to set you free. Do not fear this visitor. Do not close the blinds. Do not pretend you didn't hear the knock. You don't have to open the door all at once, but you do have to pause. You do have to acknowledge what's asking for your attention. Place your hand over your heart. Say nothing. Just feel. Is there a word rising uninvited? A name? A regret? A long-lost version of you waiting at the edge of your consciousness? That's where your healing begins. This isn't about going back. It's about going in. Because every Sagittarian soul, no matter how free, needs to come home. Home to the forgotten room in their spirit where something sacred still waits untouched. In the next part, we'll step through that doorway, not into memory but into meaning. Because what you're encountering now isn't random. It's a soul agreement, returning at the exact moment you are finally ready to reclaim what was lost. Not in the past, but in you. Gate 2. The door of your home is also the door of your soul. Sagittarius, you have always believed in freedom, in moving forward, in not being held hostage by the past. But there are doors in the soul that cannot be outrun. Doors that stay closed not because you forgot them, but because you were never quite ready to return. And now, after all the journeys, the changes, the inner growth, you find yourself at one such door. Not a physical one, but an energetic threshold where something you buried begins to knock. Perhaps it comes in a dream. Perhaps it comes in a silence so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat in ways you haven't for years. Perhaps it comes in the shape of a tall man, silent, unmoving, simply present. He's not here to take anything. He's not here to disrupt your life. He comes only to awaken the part of you that fell asleep long ago. The part that still waits by a window inside your soul. I once guided a Sagittarius woman named Nara. She was strong, bold, always leading with her fire. Always the one others turned to for vision and hope. But after losing someone she loved in her early 20s, she never spoke of it again. She traveled the world, built a life, found new purpose. But some nights she dreamed of a knock at her door. And when she opened it, he was there. Not the man she lost, but a tall figure cloaked in light and silence. He never spoke. He never entered. He just stood. And she always woke up crying, unable to explain why. Eventually we understood. The knock wasn't him. It wasn't even grief. It was her. The part of herself that never got to say goodbye. The part that never asked, "Why did you leave?" The part that still held on to love like a lantern in the dark, hoping someone might return to carry it with her. And that tall man? He was the shape of her longing, her surrender, her unfinished ritual. Sagittarius, you may think you've let go, but some things don't leave with time. They wait quietly in the attic of the soul. Not to torment you, but to be witnessed. Because healing isn't forgetting. Healing is remembering with clarity, without judgment, without the need to control what cannot be changed. There is a teaching in Buddhist meditation. The body is the house, but the mind is the dweller. And if the dweller has left, the house becomes habit, not home. How many of your daily routines, your smiles, your affirmations, are echoes of a life you created while leaving part of yourself behind? You've lived well. You've lived fully. But the question remains, have you returned? Returned not to the past, but to the stillness you've been avoiding. Returned not to pain, but to presence. Return not to grief, but to meaning. Sagittarius, your fire is sacred, but not all fire is meant to burn ahead. Some fire is meant to sit, flickering, in a quiet room while you remember what it means to be here. That tall man, that presence may not be a person. He may be the dream you abandoned, the question you never answered, the forgiveness you never gave yourself. He comes not to judge but to invite. If you've ever heard a knock that no one else heard, if you've ever paused mid-task because something invisible stirred inside you, know that it was never just imagination. It was the call of your own soul. And now it's time to open the door. Not all the way, but enough for light to slip in. Enough for the air to shift. Enough for something old and holy to breathe again. You don't need to understand why this moment is happening now. You only need to trust that your soul does not make mistakes. It knows when you're ready. It knows when the wound is no longer sharp, but sacred. It knows when the silence has matured enough to finally speak. So sit with it. Breathe with it. Let the figure at the threshold be what it is. A symbol, not of what's lost, but of what's calling to be found again. And let your heart respond not with fear, but with presence. Because the door you're opening is not to the outside world. It's to the place inside you that has waited patiently, beautifully, for the day you would finally come home. In the next part, we'll go even deeper. Not into the past, but into the spiritual meaning of this visitation. We'll ask, why now? Why this symbol? And what does it mean when the soul begins to return to what it once left behind? Gate 3. He didn't come to stay. He came to awaken what you buried. Sagittarius, not every presence that returns is meant to stay. Some come not to rebuild but to awaken. Not to speak, but to stir the part of your soul that has been asleep for too long. That tall man, the one you see in dreams, the one who knocks in silence, the one who stands at the threshold with eyes that seem to know everything, is not a stranger, and he's not a ghost. He is a reflection, a presence that exists only because something within you is ready to be seen. You may have thought you had healed, that you had moved on, that the pain, the memory, the unfinished part of your story was just a chapter turned quietly years ago. But Sagittarius, healing is not a straight line. It loops. It returns. It circles back not to break you, but to show you how far you've come and what you still carry. And what returns now is not your past. It's your permission to finally face what you once had to leave behind in order to survive. I once spoke with a Sagittarian healer named Jonah. He was kind, insightful, full of laughter and wisdom. But when we touched on a certain chapter of his life, his first love, a man he lost not to death but to silence, his voice shifted. He left in the middle of winter, Jonah said. Just vanished. I never got an explanation. I told myself I was fine. But every winter I still look at the door. I still wonder if he'll ever knock again, even just to say goodbye. That winter had passed 10 years ago. And yet, Jonah's heart still lingered at that doorway. Not because he hadn't tried to move on, but because he had never allowed himself to feel the full truth of what had happened. I didn't let myself grieve, he said. I was supposed to be strong. I thought Sagittarius doesn't look back. But what he learned, what we learn in moments like these, is that looking back isn't weakness. It's reclaiming the parts of us we exiled in order to appear okay. Sagittarius, you have always walked forward. You're the arrow, the visionary, the one who finds meaning in movement. But sometimes meaning waits in stillness. Sometimes the truest transformation isn't found in the next destination, but in the courage to sit with what you once left behind. That man who stands at the edge of your dream world doesn't need to be identified. He may not even have a name, because his role isn't to remind you of who hurt you. It's to bring you back to the version of you that was hurt, and to show you that you are now strong enough to hold that version with love. In many spiritual traditions, there is a teaching that a soul only encounters a true ritual when it has passed through enough lifetimes to be still. This moment, this presence, this tall man, is not here to enter your life in the way people do. He's here to awaken a soul memory, a doorway of becoming, and that requires you to look not at him but at yourself. What part of you did you abandon when that door first closed? What version of you stopped speaking, stopped trusting, stopped hoping? What dream did you lock away and label too painful to revisit? Because Sagittarius, you are not here just to teach others truth. You are here to embody it. And the truth is this: until you sit with what hurts, you will never be fully free. This isn't about regret. This is about reverence. Reverence for the love you gave, the hope you held, the faith you refused to lose even when everything around you said you should. You are not being asked to relive your past. You are being asked to retrieve a part of yourself that still waits in it, not to stay there but to finally walk it home. You don't need to write letters, burn sage, or recreate old scenes to find closure. You only need to ask with sincerity, what am I still carrying that is ready to be released? What memory have I avoided that now deserves to be met? Not with fear, but with compassion. Perhaps it's the version of you who loved without knowing how it would end. Perhaps it's the one who trusted too soon. Or the one who said goodbye with a smile but never stopped aching after the door closed. Perhaps the one who still asks late at night, was I not enough? And to that version I want you to whisper this: you were always enough. You were simply loving someone who didn't know how to receive it. And now it's time to stop proving your worth by holding on to what never held you. That tall man is not here to stay. He has no words. Because words aren't needed. What he brings is something older than language: presence, stillness, witness. And in being witnessed, the wound begins to release its grip. So sit with him, not with fear but with honor. Close your eyes. Let the images come. Let the memories rise. And when they do, breathe, not to fix them, not to understand them, but to say to yourself, I'm finally ready to see this clearly. I'm finally ready to stop running. I'm finally ready to come home. Because Sagittarius, when the soul is ready, it does not seek answers. It seeks integration. Seeks peace. It seeks truth, not as philosophy but as feeling. In the next part, we will enter the final threshold, not of remembering but of release. The moment when you no longer ask why he came or whether he'll return. Because by then you'll understand he was never the one you needed to forgive. It was always you. Gate 4. The final goodbye that sets your soul free. Sagittarius, there comes a moment in every soul's journey when the need for answers finally dissolves. When the waiting ends, not because someone came back, but because you did. Not because the door opened from the outside, but because you finally realized you were the one holding the key all along. This is that moment. Not a grand climax. Not a dramatic ending. Just a quiet breath. A soft truth. A final goodbye, not to them, but to the part of you that stayed behind waiting for something that was never yours to chase. You don't need to ask why he came anymore. You don't need to know who he was or what he meant. He served his purpose. He was a mirror, and you stood still long enough to see yourself in it. Not the version of you that was abandoned or silenced or hurt, but the version that kept going anyway. The one who survived. The one who softened instead of hardening. The one who dared to open the door inward. Sagittarius, you have lived with your fire pressed against the world for so long, burning for freedom, for truth, for movement. But real freedom was never out there. It was here, in the moment you stopped waiting for permission to be whole. You were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to remember. And now you do. You remember that no one's absence can define your worth. That no silence can silence your truth. That no dream you buried is lost unless you refuse to call it home again. I once sat with a Sagittarian woman named Layla. She had spent decades feeling like something was missing. She thought it was closure. Or maybe justice. Or perhaps a final moment of clarity from the man who left without a word. But when she stopped chasing that moment, when she sat down with herself and simply asked, "What do I need that only I can give?" the answer came like water. Forgiveness. Not for him. Not even for the pain. But for herself, for abandoning the part of her that kept waiting. And when she forgave herself, everything changed. Not instantly. Not with a rush of relief. But gradually, like light filling a room. The dreams stopped feeling like hauntings. The silence stopped feeling like punishment. The door in her soul creaked open, and instead of longing, there was space. Space for joy. For stillness. For love that didn't ache. That is what is beginning for you now, Sagittarius. A love that doesn't ache. A home that doesn't echo. A fire that burns not to escape, but to warm the parts of you that never stopped believing. The tall man has served his role. He came not to ask for anything, but to give you the final gift your soul needed most. The mirror of your readiness. And now that you've seen it, he doesn't need to stay. You don't need his presence anymore, because the part of you that once needed to be witnessed has already been seen by you. This is what true awakening looks like. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It comes when you sit still long enough to feel the truth move through your chest without resistance. And that truth is this: the final door was never outside you. It was always within. So close your eyes. Take a breath. Not to release someone else, but to release your younger self, the one who didn't know they were allowed to stop waiting. Place your hand over your heart. Not in ritual, but in remembrance. Whisper quietly. Not for the world to hear, but for your own soul to understand. I'm ready now. Ready to let go. Ready to begin again. Ready to live from the part of me that no longer needs to be chosen. Because I have already chosen myself. And when you walk forward from this moment, you'll notice something strange. There is no more knocking. No more haunting presence. Because you no longer live in the house where sorrow sleeps. You live now in the space of freedom. Not the freedom to run, but the freedom to remain, to love again, to breathe fully, to be. The tall man has gone, but the one who stays is you. And that, Sagittarius, is the most sacred homecoming of all. Conclusion: you were never waiting for them. You were waiting for you. Sagittarius, after everything we've walked through, after the dreams, the echoes, the symbols, the knock that wasn't truly a knock, you can stop holding your breath now. There's nothing more to wait for, nothing more to prove, nothing more to chase. Because this wasn't a journey back to them, it was a journey back to you. You thought you were waiting for someone to return, for a presence to knock, for a version of the past to finally arrive with answers in hand. But what you were really waiting for was the moment your own soul said, I'm ready. I'm ready to come home. Not to what was, but to what's always been within. You are no longer at the door. You are inside now. Inside your healing. Inside your clarity. Inside a peace that does not depend on closure or apologies or recognition. The tall man did not come to give you what was missing. He came so you could see what was never lost. And now that you've seen it, you can release everything else. The waiting, the wondering. Let it fall behind you like dust from a journey already traveled. And if this message touched a part of you you didn't even realize was still alive, honor it. Share it if you feel someone else is waiting for the same kind of return. Subscribe if your soul feels safe here. Not because you have to, but because you've found something that reminds you. Your journey matters. Your feelings are sacred. And your light is not too much. It's exactly what was needed. This space is here for you. Not just today. Not just for this message. But as a soft place to land. Every time the world feels too loud and your soul needs stillness. You are no longer a wanderer lost. You are a seeker found. And the rest of your story begins now. Not in the past. Not in someone else's hands, but in your own sacred heart.